Great. Okay, let's get started this morning. My name is Dr. Dick Walker. As I mentioned, I've been a physician for well over 30 years. My background is internal medicine, emergency medicine. I also have a master's in public health dealing with preventive medicine, nutrition, and those sorts of things. And I've practiced a pretty broad type of clinical medicine with a great interest in nutrition alternatives, which eventually led me to start to understand the science of redox. So we're going to jump into that this morning. We're going to talk about redox science. You know, it's one of the essentials of life. Along with oxygen, water, and food, we need cellular communication. We're going to talk about just what that is and how it pertains to redox this morning. So redox is really the foundation for healthy cells. Why is it so important? Well, it's because it's essential. Life wouldn't exist without it. They're an absolute requirement for healthy functional cells of all types, regardless of where they are in your body. And it's really the foundation of cellular metabolism. Cellular dysfunction, of course, is the root cause of all illnesses. And we always talk about addressing causes, and it doesn't get more basic than redox cellular communication. Redox intervention works the very best as an upstream to prevent metabolic breakdown. What I mean by that is it is the foundation of metabolism, and it is where health really begins. And development of cell dysfunction and then relying on drugs to try to fix that is really, as a targeted intervention, is really not your best strategy. And at any stage, restoring redox homeostasis oftentimes will result in a tremendous improvement in cellular function. Redox signaling and all that it implies is essential to maximizing your cellular health, even if you feel that you're pretty darn healthy. You can take it to a whole different level if you start to supplement with a redox signaling product like Asea. And Asea happens to be the only product of that sort on Earth. And this is really, if you're just wondering why redox is important, this is really all you need to know. You don't need to know all of the science I'm going to present now. But for those who are scientifically inquisitive and just want to know a bit more about how this works and what's the science behind it, that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So let's get started with that. I want to emphasize that Asea Redox is not cell specific. I get all kinds of calls asking me if it will help this respiratory condition or this neurologic condition or musculoskeletal condition. Redox is involved in every one of those. All cells are basically similar in how they breathe, how they eat, how they eliminate waste, how they repair, how they replace. And yes, cells do breathe, and we're going to be talking about cellular respiration this morning. All types of cells can benefit from additional redox signaling molecules to enhance the actions that naturally occurring redox signaling molecules provide. And by that, I mean your cells are producing redox signaling molecules all of the time. It's part of the essence of life. They can't exist without them. And as a function of living, they produce them. However, often they don't produce enough to have the level of health that they would like to achieve. All cells can potentially improve and regain specific functions as a result of enhancing cellular health with redox. You know, as clinicians, and I suspect that many of you on the call are clinicians of some variety or another, you have people come to you all the time looking for help. They have a variety of symptoms. It's obvious that they are sick. Something's not right in their body. And because we know that everything that is either right or not right in your body emanates from the health of their cells, you know, without even taking a history, that somewhere in their body, there are cells that are doing one of two things. They either aren't doing what they were designed to do because they have problems with their redox biology, or they're doing something that they were not intended to do and causing problems. And the solution to that, or at least a major part of the solution to that, can be supplementing with redox signaling molecules. I will put in our company's standard disclosure here, and that is that supplementation with redox doesn't cure, heal, or treat anything. What it does is gives the body a supplemental source of these redox signaling molecules that the cells know exactly what to do with. So no matter what type of symptoms your patients, your friends or family are suffering from, it's emanating from cells that are dysfunctional. And oftentimes the root cause of that dysfunction, a large part of it anyway, is because they are not in what we call redox balance or redox homeostasis. And we're going to address that here in a minute. We're going to talk about the science of redox signaling. Some of my slides, I will give credit to Dr. Lee Osler. He's a friend of mine. I just wrote the foreword to his second book, and I will recommend that, and I'll have a screenshot of that here for you towards the middle of the presentation. But I borrowed his slides because it was just faster than making my own. So we're going to talk about the science of redox signaling and the importance of that to your health. Redox comes from a combination of the terms reduction and oxidation. I'll explain those here in a minute. It's all about signal transduction. It's all about how our cells communicate, how they signal when they're in trouble, how they signal what the solution is. And we call that cellular communication. So to understand, you've really got to think small. You've got to start thinking of atoms and molecules. Actually, even a little bit smaller, you've got to start thinking of electrons. Of course, your cells are made up of opposing forces, protons, which are positively charged, and electrons, which are negative. But if you really want to understand redox, you really do have to think that small. The human body is made up of atoms that form molecules that combine to form cells. Molecules are used as building blocks for forming the structure of our cells. Molecules function as biochemistry, providing the function that happens within those cells. Molecules serve as information processing that is necessary to maintain life on an instantaneous, reflex, automatic basis. Molecules communicate between cells and within cells. And molecules, quite frankly, are the foundation for all healthy cells, without exception. Our cells are little biochemical factories. But what's going on here? What's controlling all of this? And, how do we start to understand the millions of reactions that are taking place? It is all about accumulating information, communicating that information both within and between cells, and adapting to constantly changing conditions. The science uses the term hormesis to describe that adaptation process. And we're going to talk about that in a little detail this morning. But redox signaling via redox signaling molecules is really what this presentation is all about. It's all about cellular communication and coordination. But let's start with what is life? It's a continuous complex of molecular interactions, molecules that are vibrating, gyrating, bumping into each other, sharing and stealing electrons, looking for the right molecular partner. It seems random if you were just to look at a cell under an electron microscope, and yet that randomness is very well controlled and coordinated. It's really a chemical stew, kind of a mosh pit of activity, if you will. But it's ruled by a complex genetic and epigenetic code. That's the roadmap. That's where the instruction manual resides. And it's coordinated by a finely tuned symphony of biochemical reactions driven by the movement of electrons along an established redox sensitive pathways. All of this stuff is pre-programmed. And that's really what leads us to this concept of redox cellular communication. What is cellular communication? Well, redox signaling is a function of innate gene pathways signaled into action by messenger molecules, responding to changes in oxidation, biochemistry, and environmental stimuli. The conditions within our cells and within our body are constantly changing, constantly being monitored and adapted. Using metabolically generated messenger molecules, to communicate both inside and between our cells. We're really talking about the software of our cells responding to a sophisticated flow of electrons. That's what redox is all about. It's the software that runs our cells using the biological form of electricity. So let's look at the bioenergetics of our cell for a minute so that you can really start to grasp how this works. There's going to be a lot of information here. Don't worry about really having to remember it all. Just kind of remember the overall context. The information here would take a couple of semesters of biochemistry for you to fully grasp and understand. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to do that. But our cells are constantly generating energy. Where's that energy come from? Well, it ultimately comes from the sun, and it gets locked up in plants through a process called photosynthesis. And those plants and the animals that eat those plants provide the fuel that energizes our cells. And that fuel comes in three categories: carbohydrates, lipids or fats, and proteins. And that fuel goes into our cells and into a structure called mitochondria. And those mitochondria are the energy factories of our cells. They also are very crucial in cellular communication because it's here where those communication molecules, those redox signaling molecules, are manufactured as a byproduct of that energy process. But fuel comes in, it combines with oxygen, which is extremely important in this equation. And what you get from that process, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that here in a second, is that you get ATP energy. And that's the fuel, that's the energy source that your cells need to conduct life. Everything in your body takes energy, and ATP is the source. It also produces, as a byproduct, carbon dioxide and water. That's why we breathe in oxygen, fuel plus oxygen, to produce ATP, but it also produces reactive oxygen species. And we'll talk about those in a second, but those are where the signaling molecules come in. They are largely in a class that we call reactive oxygen species. So here's just a diagram of a mitochondria, and we can see that the inputs are carbohydrates, glucose, glycogen, etc., going through glycolysis. They're also free fatty acids. That's where the fats in your diet come in, and they go through a process called lipolysis. And then the proteins come into this mitochondria as amino acids, go through a process called proteolysis, but they all get used to produce ATP. So what is oxidation? Well, oxidation, it just means the loss of an electron, and reduction is gaining an electron. And molecules that are missing electrons are called oxidants and are reactive and unstable. They are referred to many times as free radicals. Those are the reactive oxygen species. We'll talk a bit about those in a little detail here in a minute. But redox reactions are ubiquitous in our cells. They're all over, and they're happening all the time. The oxidation reduction potential of a cell or of a molecule indicates its potential to attract electrons. So if you ever come across that, that just means how active, how biochemically active is that molecule. Now, don't freak out. This slide is worth at least a month's worth of education in biochemistry. This is the Krebs cycle, that thing that all health care professionals fear on the final exam. But don't worry, I'm just going to point out some important factors here. Number one, the importance of oxygen to our health. Look at all those red circles. Those are oxygen molecules. You can't tell me that they aren't very important to the generation of cellular energy. They are ubiquitous throughout the Krebs cycle, which is a series of chemical reactions. That series of chemical reactions is really there to turn glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids into energy. And yes, we use amino acids and fatty acids for building cells as well, but we're talking about using them as a fuel source to produce ATP. They go through in a membrane sequence within the mitochondria that is an elegant design for turning these fuels into ATP. And they do that simply by removing electrons from these fuel sources. And every time an electron is removed, the energy that has held that electron bound to that molecule is released and forms a molecule of ATP. It's a little more complex than that, but that's basically what's going on. So it goes through what's called an electron transport chain, constantly moving that electron from one molecule to another, releasing ATP as it goes through that cycle of reactions, and producing reactive oxygen species. The oxygen here acts as an electron donor, and it has a very high redox potential, meaning that it is very active in terms of sharing electrons with other species. And these reactive oxygen species are the small percentage of oxygen that is not reduced, basically adding an electron at the end of that electron transport chain. So what do you need to remember? Oxygen is essential for life. Redox signaling molecules, ROSs, are a byproduct of this metabolic sequence, and they are also essential to life as signaling molecules. Now let's bring antioxidants into the equation. What do they do? Well, they act as electron donors to neutralize free radicals, which are molecules that are missing an electron, and they will do almost anything to gain that electron. And in so doing, if they don't get neutralized, they can damage cell structures like membranes and nuclei and DNA. So antioxidants modulate oxidative stress in our cells. What is oxidative stress? It's an important concept for you to understand, because oxidative stress is a condition that occurs in our cells all the time, and it represents an imbalance between the production of reactive oxygen species, these unstable molecules, and the antioxidants, which also are produced in our cells. It comes in several different varieties, and mild levels of oxidative stress is a normal situation and is present all the time in healthy cells and healthy bodies. Excessive levels, however, cause inflammation at the cellular level, which is another word for oxidative stress. Oxidative stress equals cellular inflammation. The emphasis here is on a balance between the reactive oxygen species and the antioxidant molecules that are made specifically to bring about that homeostasis or balance. So let's look at reactive oxygen species for a minute, because they've gotten a bad rap. They've gotten a bad name. During the 80s and early 90s, most of the literature would point to reactive oxygen species as being harmful. So are they good? Are they bad? Are they really bad? Well, it really depends. They're really all of the above, depending on the concentration of them, the location in the cell, the cycle that the cell is in, the type of reactive oxygen species, and other factors as well. But not all ROSs are free radicals determined to damage your cells. ROSs also serve as redox signaling molecules. ROS equals RSM, so to speak. It's complicated, and scientific investigation into the beneficial roles played by redox signaling molecules is accelerating rapidly. And money is being invested throughout the world and has grown exponentially in the last 10 years. And you may have heard about some of that research. It is expanding rapidly. When I first became involved with Asea Redox and wanted to learn about redox and what it was all about, I went to one of the main sources of scientific information, PubMed.gov, National Institute of Health, and there were less than 1,000 references. Now, through various searches, you can come up with hundreds of thousands of references to redox signaling, redox biology. So you can see that the information is expanding rapidly. And understanding the numerous roles played by redox signaling molecules in both normal and pathologic conditions is revolutionizing our understanding of both health and disease. And redox homeostasis is the goal of cellular health. And everything that I'm telling you this morning is supported by the literature. For example, here's an article, Reactive Oxygen Species, Homeostasis and Redox Regulation in Cellular Signaling. This has all been laid out over the last 20 years or so. So at this point, you may be saying, well, yes, Dr. Walker, but what do you mean by a redox signaling molecule? Excuse me, my mouth is getting a little bit dry doing all this talking. Well, the top row here is an example of 4 of the most plentiful and very useful redox signaling molecules. There are many others, and I don't know what the total is. I think it's 16 or 18, but actually probably much bigger than that when you look at molecules that can facilitate redox biology. Superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, hypochlorous acid, nitric oxide. These are the main foundational signaling molecules in our body, and they're involved with transcription factors. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk specifically about NF-kappa B and NRF2 and EGR1. These are gene pathways and transcription factors that facilitate redox reactions. And sure, cytokines and hormones and all of these, but all of these secondary messenger type systems depend on redox. So what's a redox signaling molecule? Well, it's a byproduct of aerobic metabolism in the Krebs cycle. It's formed in the mitochondria. It's naturally occurring in every cell. They're very small molecules, 3 or 4 atoms at the most. They're short-lived. Their half-life is in the millionths of a second. Fortunately, Asea molecules stay active in your system for several hours after you drink them. They are an intense area of research, as I mentioned. And if you're looking at this from a business standpoint, they are an excellent business opportunity because we are discovering more and more how important they are for maintaining health. They are involved at a foundational level to regulate every major system in your body at the cellular level. They don't just work on some cells and not work on others. They don't work better on some cells than they do on others. They work the same in every type of cell because they're essential for that cell's homeostasis and health. Here's an article, if you look down in the lower left-hand corner, this is reference number 19 out of 34,427, an overview of mechanisms of redox signaling. Folks, there's a lot of real science behind what I'm telling you. And redox signaling is an adaptogen. And let's talk about that, what that means and how that functions. Let's say you're a cell and everything is fine. You're in oxidative balance over on the left-hand side. That's a condition called homeostasis. But then for some reason, oxidative stress develops. You have an excess of reactive oxygen species over antioxidants, and that spells oxidative stress. What happens? Well, that results in a signaling process involving electrons and involving gene expression that causes a solution and adaptation to that excessive oxidative stress. That involves numerous processes, gene signaling, all kinds of enzyme formation. It incorporates vitamins and minerals, but that process is all orchestrated by redox cellular communication. So oxidative stress can come in several different versions. Mild oxidative stress is normal. It's happening all the time. And it does trigger cellular defense signaling pathways, leading to an increase in cellular protection. And that process is happening all the time in your body. An example of that would be starvation. Even just the fact that you don't eat for 12 hours, maybe overnight. Certain redox switches cause our metabolism to switch to a fat burning mode and develop metabolic ketosis. That's normal, and it happens because of redox. It can also come in severe modality when it comes to trauma or infections or certain toxins. And that triggers the formation of harmful metabolites. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it also triggers the formation of extra redox or extra antioxidant molecules to correct the situation. Sepsis would be another cause of another example of overwhelming oxidative stress at the cellular level. Sepsis, if you don't know, if you're not a medical professional, means an overwhelming infection. It also occurs, oxidative stress also occurs in a chronic form. Chronically elevated levels of oxidative stress is a highly significant risk factor for morbidity, illness, and mortality, death in older patients. Common factors are increased redox stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, epigenetic modifications, along with dysregulation of the immune system. Those are all consequences of chronically elevated oxidative stress or inflammation. And they're all associated with decreases in redox signaling molecules, declining redoxome efficiency, and mitochondrial decline, accelerating aging, and increasing all chronic disease. So what do we mean by an adaptogen? Well, what we mean is that problems develop all of the time, and our cells need to know how to detect those problems and then communicate those problems, and then bring about a solution, modulated largely through electron flows and redox signaling. Let's talk a minute about transcription factors. We covered antioxidants. Those are important in this whole conversation, but so are transcription factors. These are proteins that when they're activated, signal and control genetic transcription by binding to specific DNA sequences. That's just how they're formed. Examples are NRF2, NF-kappa B, BDNF is another one, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and others. And we'll talk about a few others later. They're important. These factors act to bring about the adaptive changes that are required to regain homeostasis, repair cellular damage, and replace damaged and aging cells. So transcription factors are hugely important. And many, if not most, are controlled by redox cellular communication. Let's just look at the science of redox signaling with regards to transcription factors. And I'm going to cover two, but there are many that, that this information applies to. But this is foundational because it applies to the level of production of antioxidants. So here we have a situation where mild oxidative stress, normal life, no big problems, no sepsis, no trauma, no injury, and the cell trends towards oxidative stress versus homeostasis. Well, the cell responds by activating this NRF2 transcription factors. First, that string of UBs have to be removed as part of the initiation process. And then the gatekeeper, the KEAP1, has to be removed from the NRF2 molecule. It can then enter the nucleus and bring about in a very peaceful way the increased production of intracellular antioxidants such as glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. And we have some evidence that shows that providing a mild increase in redox signaling molecules can actually improve or increase this process by 20 to 30%. That's where it all starts. Now, we also, if our cells are in an increased oxidative stress situation caused by trauma or infection or whatever, this now will activate a different transcription factor called NF-kappa B. It will activate, the inhibitor will be removed from the kappa B molecule. It will then translocate to the nucleus and then also generate increased antioxidant production. But you don't want your cells to have to go through the disruption of high amounts of oxidative stress. Remember, that means inflammation in the cell in order to cause antioxidant production to increase. You want it to happen in a more peaceful way. Here's another diagram of a high oxidative stress situation. And the reason why you don't want these high oxidative stress situations to develop is that they cause production of things like cytokines and all kinds of detrimental molecules that can cause cell damage along the path of creating extra antioxidant molecules. You want it to happen through the NRF2 pathway instead of the NF-kappa B pathway. And what's interesting is that we know that redox signaling molecules, if plentiful in your cells, can actually facilitate the activation of NRF2. Those redox signaling molecules, you can see them just to the upper right of the big, large green circle, NRF2. And when we can activate these in a peaceful, natural way through increasing our redox signaling molecules, that can bring about many beneficial improvements in cellular health. So Dr. Osler has sort of come up with what he calls the redox rheostat to explain this, this constantly changing balance within your cells involving these two transcription factors and the production of antioxidants. Now, here's another article, Basic Principles and Emerging Concepts in Redox Control of Transcription Factors. So I'm not just coming up with this information because it's associated with Asea redox. This is how our cells work. So we have a constantly changing situation. On the left-hand side, we have adequate antioxidant defenses. NRF2 is a primary mode of causing their production inside the cell. And that's a situation where we have high energy in the cell, we have homeostasis, cells are doing just fine. Over on the right-hand side, we've got just the opposite of that. We have high oxidative stress. We have oxidation levels, which are excessive. And in that situation, we have low energy production. We have oxidative damage by cytokines and other damaging cellular or metabolic intermediates, and cell death can take place. You really want your cells to be existing to the right or to the left-hand side of this redox rheostat. Here we have an article that talks about that, redox homeostasis, the golden mean of healthy living. And it truly is, because it means your cells are healthy, they're in a low stress situation, and everything is working as it should, and not having to react to excessive levels of oxidative stress. Here's what we call the redox regulatory circuit. And it is constantly being modulated. We're constantly having oxidative stress, calling for the NRF2 keep one complex to dissociate, to enter the nucleus, translocate into the nucleus, cause that gene expression, which ends up increasing antioxidants and calming down that stress. The problem, the detection, this communication, and the solution all occurs naturally, all occurs reflexively, all occurs without you thinking about it whatsoever. You just have to be sure that your cells have the tools necessary, the redox signaling molecules necessary to bring that about. What's interesting is that we have found that a number of bioenergetic and oxidative therapies, and I'll give you some examples here in a minute, also can stimulate the mitochondria to form more redox signaling molecules and to manage oxidative stress. In fact, that's how they work. Asea certainly does it. You can call Asea a biohack. It basically just supplies these extra molecules that are necessary to cause the NRF2 to enter the nucleus and increase our antioxidant production. And they enhance NRF2 activity directly. You can see that over on the left-hand side of the slide here. You really don't want to put your cells in a situation where they have to activate an F-kappa B. So here again, redox lifestyle has a huge influence on this redox rheostat. And I'll I'll mention that Dr. Osler has just published a second book, which is really all about the redox lifestyle and how it impacts our cellular health through enhanced redox cellular communication. Here are those bio-oxidative therapies we talked about that work essentially through the mitochondria and through an improved redox signaling process. Ozone, exercise, sleep is actually should be on here as well. Certain nutritionals, photonic therapy, laser therapy, nitric oxide, vitamins, all kinds of things that are done that fall under the bio-oxidative therapy label. Actually, the reason why they are beneficial to the body is because they have beneficial effects on the redox rheostat and put our cells in a more redox homeostasis situation. Here's just a bunch of articles that Lee pulled up that support the information that I'm sharing with you here. So our health really is determined by our epigenetics, our genetics, our DNA, and certainly by all of these metabolic pathways and cellular processes that I've been talking about. And really, Lee has also coined a term that I think is very illustrative of all of this, and that is healthomics, the process of staying healthy. This is Lee's first book, Redox Matters. I've got a well-worn copy here that I refer to. I am very interested in this subject, and Lee and I have been working together. Lee much more diligently. I can't imagine the time and energy that he put forth to write that book. And he's come out with a second one, Healthy Matters, which is really talks about lifestyle and diet and all of the interactions that take place between our environment and our daily living and redox, and how we can maximize the benefits of redox in addition to consuming a redox supplement like Asea Redox. So now let's and you can get those books if you want them on either Amazon or Dr. Osler has a website called redoxmatters.com, and you can get them both there as well. Now let's switch to talking about Asea Redox in particular. Asea is the only company in the world where you can get a redox signaling supplement. Comes in this beautiful blue bottle, and it is a solution that is derived from salt water, but is no longer salt water. It contains a mixture of redox signaling molecules. And this was a true breakthrough to be able to stabilize these molecules, which are in nature very unstable. In your cells, they only last a fraction of a second. And so it was this stabilization process that has made Asea Redox possible. So what is Asea Redox? Well, it's a proprietary and patented combination of redox signaling molecules formulated specifically to safely optimize the signaling effects of redox molecules on cell biology. So it's not just an accidental product. It is designed to do what it does, and that is to facilitate redox cellular communication. It's protected by patents and trade secrets. It's owned by the company called Asea, a biotech company located in Pleasant Grove, Utah. But, you know, one of the questions that many people ask is, okay, these molecules are important. They're foundational to life and health. But how do we know that consuming extra molecules actually does anything? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the mechanism of action. In Asea, most of the research specific to Asea has been conducted to try to answer those questions. And so one of the most interesting studies that Asea has done to answer this question, how does it work, what does it do, was to, and when you do a study, what you do is formulate a theory, which is essentially asking a question, and then designing an experiment which will hopefully answer that question. So the question was, consuming Asea Redox supplement, these molecules, could it have an epigenetic effect on our cells? And could that explain some of the results that we observe some of the benefits that people are having? And if so, if that was possible, would it identify certain patterns of epigenetic influence attributable to that supplementation? And last but not least, how long would it last? How long would these beneficial changes last for? And so the science certainly supported looking into this: cellular redox, epigenetics and disease, redox regulation of genome stability, redox basis for epigenetic modification. You know, there was science saying that redox was involved here, but we didn't know specifically whether supplementing with redox, with a redox supplement would have any beneficial changes here. So we went to a company that studies genetic issues, Torrey Labs, and they designed a study, 60 participants, and they were studying the efficacy of an 8-ounce dose of Asea daily. The average age of the participants was 35 years old, not a bunch of old people, about, you know, a few more females than males. And they used a placebo, and that was salt water, the same basic ingredient that is used to manufacture Asea Redox, the signaling supplement. And so they divided these up in half. It was a double crossover study. If you're a statistician, you know what that means. And what they found from this experiment was that, and they were looking at what we call signaling pathway genes, not individual genes that determine things like hair color, eye color, that sort of thing, but on signaling pathway genes, which control a number of these transcription factors and pathways of modulating and adapting to situations. So they were looking at signaling pathway genes. And what they found was that there were minor changes in a number of these when people drank Asea, but there were significant changes in 5 of them. And these 5 areas of genetic transcription and gene pathway stimulation involved some major things: innate immune system, vascular health signaling pathways, digestive enzyme signaling pathways, hormone modulation, and last but certainly not least, maybe most important, inflammation pathway reduction, affecting millions upon millions of people who have problems in these areas. But these were the 5 genes, signaling pathway genes that were stimulated in a statistically significant amount. And let's take a look at one of those. Let's take a look at the EGR1 gene to get a better idea of what's going on here. So the ERG1 or EGR1 gene controls a number of gene signaling mechanisms, transcription factors, essentially. So let's look at this. Second, from the top left is the NRF2 pathway. So here is documentation that additional Asea or additional redox molecules in the form of Asea actually stimulates and facilitates the production of the the output from the NRF2 pathway. Interestingly enough, we also know that it affects neuron synapses and serotonin support, and that comes from that the circle up on the top row, second from the left, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Remember I mentioned that, BDNF. There are other transcription factors on here, but I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't have time to. But there's some pretty important things here: insulin signaling, human thyroid stimulating, a number of different transcription factors that are affected simply by drinking 8 ounces of Asea a day, affecting vascular health. That's the VEGF-A. That's the transcription factor that affects vascular health, improving vascular elasticity, hormone modulation, you name it. Many, many beneficial effects just by stimulating this one signaling pathway gene, the EGR1. Remember, we had extensive comments on the NF-kappa B and NRF2 transcription factors, and it appears that this is one of, if not the most important way, maybe it is the most important way, that Asea helps to improve the NRF2 pathway for stimulating increased antioxidant production. But we do know that simply by drinking, in this study, it was statistically proven that drinking 8 ounces of Asea a day improved the immune system, helped maintain a healthy inflammatory response, because a little bit of inflammation is beneficial. Too much and chronic inflammation definitely is not. Helps maintain cardiovascular health. By the way, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in our country. If you factor out COVID, improve gut health, and it helps to modulate our hormone balances. We also have information from an earlier study that was done that shows that drinking Asea, they did a study in athletes, and it showed that simply by drinking Asea, it shifted 43 metabolites in the area of lipid lipolysis, mobilized fatty acids to use for energy, spared glycogen. So this is why it seemed to help athletes to have more endurance and quicker recovery. They also noted in that study that it had a beneficial effect on how the athletes used oxygen. That's down in the left lower corner here, with effects on the VO2 max and the ventilatory threshold. And if you remember, we talked about how important oxygen is in that whole production of energy and redox signaling molecules. So a more efficient use of oxygen certainly would have an overall benefit on cellular health. If you want more information on any of these topics, you can go, if you want, on the science of redox, I use PubMed, the National Institute of Health Library, and that's www.pubmed.gov. If you want information specific to Asea science, then you can go to www.aseascience.com, and the gene study is there, the metabolic study is there, other studies showing efficacy and just different science that have been done on specifically on Asea redox molecules. You won't find Asea in PubMed because that's a brand name. If you want testimonials, and there are tons of them, you can go to redoxexperiences.com and realredoxresults.com. They both require a password. And there are a couple of Facebook sites that have lots of information on it. Asea Healthy Self. It's a private group. You have to be added by somebody who's already in that group. So if you want to hang around a little bit longer, let's look at aging and redox, because this is a really important topic. What's a connection? Well, as we age, our cells' redox rheostat becomes less responsive, and we become exposed to greater levels of oxidative stress. And as our redox signaling molecule production decreases, which it does with age, we see a progressive increase in all chronic diseases. Now that we can restore our redox signaling molecules to a more youthful level through supplementation, we can have a significant impact on life, not necessarily just lifespan, but health span. We know that with age, stress, etc., our production of redox signaling molecules, our natural production declines. We end up with deficiencies and imbalances. We have diminished cellular function and efficiency. We get poor communication, which can lead to poor outcomes. And you begin to see and feel the effects of aging. In fact, cellular aging is the most common risk factor for all chronic diseases. So instead of focusing on one type of disease at a time, let's focus on the most common risk factor for all of them. Why is that? Because we get decreased ability to control all of that biochemistry. In fact, studies reveal that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy, and 88% are metabolically inflexible, meaning they can't switch back and forth between burning fats and burning carbohydrates. They have decrease in epigenetic signaling necessary for DNA expression, decrease in repair, decrease in replacing damaged cells, decreasing levels of autophagy. That's an important one. That's our detoxifying process. That's the process by which our cells eliminate waste products that can accumulate in our cells and cause damage and dysfunction. And And supplementing with redox molecules can help restore that autophagy to more youthful levels. Decreases in immune protection. And it's interesting that metabolic brain cell dysfunction has been shown to precede cognitive decline by as much as a decade prior to the onset of symptoms. Again, everything that I'm saying here is proven in the literature. I'm not just pulling facts out of the sky. And to know that when we start to have cognitive problems as we get older, that those problems started 10 years before we can't remember our grandkids' names is an important thing to understand and has important implications for prevention. Redox signaling in neurotransmission and cognition during aging. Here we have some of the science that's been done on this. Reactive oxygen, or role of reactive oxygen species in mediating signaling in ages, redox biology and neurologic function and dysfunction as we age, redox signaling, neuroinflammation, and neurodegeneration. Are you starting to see what we know about aging and the loss of proper redox cellular communication? Redox biology and neurologic function, dysfunction, and aging. So aging and chronic inflammation is interesting to look at because it's a new branch of age-related research into immunosenescence associated with the loss of redox balance and homeostasis with advancing disease. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a highly significant risk factor for morbidity and mortality in older patients. And common factors are increased redox stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, epigenetic modification, along with dysregulation of the immune system, and much more, all associated with decreases in redox signaling molecules and declining redoxome efficiency. This is important stuff, and it's important for all ages, but it's even more important for those people over age, let's pick 50. We've saw beneficial changes even in 35-year-olds, so maybe anybody over 35. But redox signaling, neuroinflammation, and neurodegeneration becomes a much more important subject the older that we get. So the most powerful anti-aging discovery of our lifetime certainly is the ability to supplement with redox signaling molecules. And Asea has the only supplement in this area. Again, Asea doesn't claim to cure, heal, or treat anything. It simply provides your cells with an ingredient that it knows exactly what to do with to promote improved cellular health. I'll wrap this up here in a minute, but I want to show you, I think pictures speak pretty loudly here. We call this woman Rosie. I've been told that she's the son of a healthcare practitioner in Australia who started supplementing with the Asea at age 84. Not because she wanted to, but because her son suggested that she do it. And by 7 weeks, we can already see some improvement in her skin, in her face. But over the years, we see progressive improvement. And at age 92, 8 years after she started, she looks like a different person. I have it in communications with people in Australia that she essentially is a different person. She has her life back. She has her health back. She is much more appreciative of still being alive at 92 than I think she would have been. And she might not even be here if it weren't for redox. So being able to extend that health span, 8 years in this case, you can see as a dramatic benefit from achieving redox homeostasis at a more efficient level, certainly contributed to by Asea. So again, you want to screenshot this where you can get more information. You're welcome to investigate this further. And I just want to thank you for watching this presentation this morning. Hopefully you've gotten a lot of information out of it that helps you to better understand why redox, what it's doing, why it's so foundational to our health and longevity, and why supplementing with redox signaling molecules might just be one of the best ideas for improving your health that there is out there. So I'm going to just stop the share and say, have a great day. Again, thanks for coming. And if you want to share this recording, it will be on vimeo.com/Global Team Elevate. And if you want a specific ID number for that recording, just get in touch with us. So thanks a lot. Have a great day. And let's stop the recording.